Wouldn't that be worthy study for you?
Yeah, but the problem lies in the credibility of those documents. There's
Good.
a lot of questions.
Be good. Like, okay, start. What's your first question about the credibility of the document?
Who wrote it? What was their motive? Who did they know? What were they trying to achieve?
Good question.
Over the century.
Great question.
Probably pertinent.
The guys who wrote it had no upside perk. The guys who wrote it were persecuted. They were martyred for their belief in Jesus. But how do you know that he was a human being? I mean, what's your evidence? How do you know he's not just a myth, a legend?
Oh, well, there's actually a good deal of historical verification that Jesus existed as a human being.
Good. Where do you find that evidence?
Well, you find it not only in the Bible, but you also find it in simultaneous verifying sources, other Jewish sources at the time.
Right.
I mean, you find evidence for him as a human being.
Yes, sir. Absolutely. Jesus Christ was a human being, no question about it. But in the primary source documents, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, he claims to be more than a human being. He actually claims to be God in human form.
He doesn't claim that in John. John speaks for him. John
No,
says
in John chapter 8, verse 58, Jesus says, before Abraham was born, I am. In John chapter 10, verse 30, Jesus says, I and the Father are one. And the Jews pick up stones to stone him for blasphemy. So obviously he claimed to be God.
But Jesus also said that it's easier for a camel to get through the eye of a needle than a rich man to go to heaven, and yet Western society isn't based on what he said.
Well, I think if you put your faith in Western society, you're making a big mistake.
Well, but Western society is based on Christianity.
Not with all the wars we have.
Western society is based on Christianity. Sure. Yes, when Western society follows what Jesus taught, then yes. But when Western society and culture do not follow Christ, they're contradicting him, aren't they? When Western society publishes a lot of pornography, is that in obedience to Christ?
But I don't see how you're saying that Christ is the only source of wisdom.
Christ never claimed that he was the only source of truth. If I want to find out about biology and chemistry, I don't go to Christ. I don't go to the Bible. I go to biology and chemistry textbooks, right? Christ is not the source of information about China, South America, or the United States. So Christ is not the only source of truth. Instead, a follower of Christ is someone who's committed to a liberal arts education where we believe that God has given us rational minds, and we better look for truth in every area.
But that doesn't jive. I mean, if you bring Jesus within the lens of critical thinking, if you look at Jesus as a human being within the lens of science and critical thinking, you cannot then separate him again and say he is God, he is above everything, and yet try to put him in a different realm.
Okay, great point. Have you ever asked yourself, why do you trust your rational mind? If you believe that your rational mind is simply a highly developed monkey's mind, do you trust the thoughts of an ape?
We're not apes.
Okay, but we've just evolved from apes. So let's, you're saying, wait a second, Christ and rational thinking don't make sense. They don't go together. No, sir, that's false. Christ and rational thinking go totally together. I'll tell you what does not go together. What does not go together is me believing there is no God, but my rational mind puts me in touch with reality.
But why does God have to be an Aramaic and marketplace Greek-speaking person who lived during the, third year of the Common Era? I don't understand why God has to be that person.
Okay, great point. We'll get to that, but let's finish this first point. Charles Darwin wrote a letter to a man named Mr. Graham. And in this letter, Charles Darwin writes, in light of the fact that our minds are simply highly developed monkeys' minds, why do we trust our rational minds to tell us the truth about reality? Would you trust the thoughts of a monkey?
I wouldn't trust the thoughts of a human a lot of the time.
That's not true. You trust your thoughts.
But within the framework of science, you can make that thinking into a critical, unbiased lens to look at the world.
Yeah, but you see, science is based on a presupposition. And the presupposition of science is my rational mind tells me the truth about reality. That's a humongous leap of faith. Now, what justifies me thinking that my rational mind tells me the truth about reality? A belief that there's an intelligent mind, the Creator God, who gave me my rational mind, created reality, and me, by thinking in a rational way, can get in touch with reality. But if you're an atheist, why do you trust your rational mind to tell you the truth about reality in light of the fact that you believe that your rational mind is a cosmic accident? Do you trust a cosmic accident?
By the definition of God, there cannot be physical, empirical, measurable evidence.
Oh, all right, fine. You're right. When we talk about God, we're not talking about a test tube.
Right.
We're not talking about biology or chemistry. But we are talking philosophy, sir, very clearly. And there's a ton of philosophical evidence that God exists, and there's a ton of historical evidence that Jesus Christ existed.
Right.
But because God exists,
Right?
and because Jesus exists, and let's assume because Jesus said he was God,
Right.
it doesn't make Jesus God.
You're right. If I stand out here and say, I'm God, I don't think you'd need to follow me around for too long before you'd find out my elevator's not going to the top. I'm a quack. But when you follow Jesus Christ around by reading the source documents, the eyewitness accounts, when you examine how did Christ treat people, what did Christ teach ethically, like the Sermon on the Mount? How did Christ die, loving and forgiving his enemies? And most importantly, did he rise from the dead? All of a sudden, the evidence, historical and philosophical, begins to point to the fact that Jesus was no quack. Jesus was no racist. Jesus was not into degrading people. He treated people with incredible forgiveness, love, compassion, graciousness. He spoke the truth. He lived the truth. He died for the truth. And then he rose from the dead.
Why did he have to rise from the dead? Wasn't his love enough? Why do we have to put that test on him and say, in order for his love to be enough, he
Right.
had to come back and show by being a zombie, basically, that his love was enough for us? That doesn't make much sense to me.
Okay, good. First point is, I like you. You're good. You're thinking. Well, I appreciate thinkers, okay? And you think, and I respect that, okay? So thank you for standing out here and thinking with me. I honor you and respect you and thank you.
Well, I respect you too.
All right, now, sir, you got to understand, I am not saying that Jesus had to rise from the dead. That'd be a little arrogant of me to say, okay, God, in order for you to reveal yourself in a way that I can accept, you got to have somebody rise from the dead. That's ridiculous. That's not integrity. No. The reason I point to the resurrection is because Jesus said when he was alive, I'm going to die and then I'm going to rise from the dead. And the historical record in the Gospels is he pulled it off. So now my point is, one of the reasons that you and I should trust him is that he really did rise from the dead. And if you die and rise from the dead, I promise, sir, I will listen very carefully to everything you have to say.
But maybe you shouldn't.
You're right.
We're approaching a point in technology where we're going to do incredible things to the human body, things that Jesus could never have imagined.
Right.
And that doesn't just because it appears to our eye to be miraculous, doesn't necessarily mean it's truth.
That actually sounds like you'd be following him out of fear.
Exactly. Yeah.
Maybe faith isn't something that should be rationalized. I mean, the whole concept of faith is that you believe in something that there is no real concrete, like you can't see God. And so it's like justifying something like love. That's an irrational thing, yet it still exists, and we still practice it today.
Every relationship that you and I have is based on trust. Now the question is the person you're trusting reliable, or are they a con artist and a liar? And all of us at times have trusted people who ripped us off, and it hurt us deeply. All of us have also trusted people who were very reliable, and we have benefited greatly from trusting these people. So remember, science is a wonderful branch of knowledge, but it is limited, incredibly limited. You will never go on a scientific date, I hope. And when I was at MIT, I met a student who dated his computer. That is sad, really sad.
But I would argue that science isn't a branch of knowledge, it's a way of knowing. It's a way of observing.
Can you scientifically prove to me that John Wilkes Booth assassinated Abraham Lincoln?
I could. I really don't know. Depending on the circumstances, I probably could.
Right, so let's get some definitions then. I would define science as knowledge based on the repeatability of an experiment. You got to be able to experiment it here in San Marcos, at Oxford University in England, at UT Austin, and if it doesn't work in Oxford and if it doesn't work in Austin, I don't care how true your experiment is here at Texas State, it's false. Science is based on the repeatability of an experiment pointing that something is true. Sir, you do not get Wellington and Napoleon back in your lab here every fall to fight the Battle of Waterloo. You don't get John Wilkes Booth back here to repeat assassinating Abraham Lincoln. Historical knowledge is different from scientific knowledge. Historical knowledge is based on the trustworthiness of eyewitness testimony. Somebody saw John Wilkes Booth shoot Abraham Lincoln. It's not repeatable. It happens once. Now, historical knowledge is legitimate knowledge, but it's radically different from scientific knowledge, which is based on repeatability. Does that make any sense?
Well, I wouldn't say it's radically different. I'd say they're interconnected. I think separating fields of knowledge on an artificial basis, and I do think it's an artificial basis, because while you can't retest the murder of Abraham Lincoln and you can't refight the Battle of Waterloo, what you're looking for in science is not the repeatability of a certain exact event. You're looking for patterns. And so yes, I agree that no, you cannot repeat those things in an exact manner in a lab, but if you're looking for historical patterns, I can give you plenty of those.
Oh, come on now, sir. You know that in history you cannot repeat the event. History is based on not repeatability. Historical knowledge is based on eyewitness testimony.
But I'm saying science is based upon repeatable patterns, and so in that sense you can interlock it with history.
Well, sure, by doing DNA tests or whatever, yes, but no, you can't get John Wilkes Booth back to fire a bullet at Abraham Lincoln. That ain't gonna happen. Was Jesus born on the island of Atlantis? If he was, then I'm gonna be highly suspicious of the document. Why? Because archaeologically, there's no evidence for the island of Atlantis. But Bethlehem, Nazareth, Jerusalem, Rome, archaeologically verifiable places. Whenever I'm confronted by a document that claims to be historical, I'm a skeptic. But I'm not a cynic, because I know that historical knowledge is possible. So the 4 tests that I use on any document that claims to be historical is internal consistency. If someone is claiming that this is an eyewitness reportage, I'm looking for contradictions. In the Gospels, there are no contradictions. There's a tremendous internal harmony. It used to be taught on every American university campus that the Bible was not written for hundreds of years after the fact. All the manuscript finds that have occurred in the past 100 years have smashed that school of thought. Why? We have manuscript of the Gospel of John in the John Rylands Museum in Manchester, England, that's dated 130 AD. That's 100 years after the fact. Then we have the writings of Clement, Bishop of Antioch, Ignatius, Bishop of Rome, in which they quote the Gospels, and their letters where they're quoting the Gospels are dated 95 and 110 AD.
But they chose which books to include in the Bible. You're choosing your own history.
That's right.
No, sir. The eyewitness community accepted Christ very clearly as an historical person who died on a cross, was buried in the tomb of Joseph of Arimathea, and was risen 3 days later. The Gnostic Gospels, the Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Peter, the Gospel of Barnabas, were not written until the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th century AD. They brought Gnostic philosophy to their Gospels, which essentially taught Judas Iscariot's the hero, because Judas Iscariot helped Christ get rid of his physical body. The physical is evil, the spiritual is good, according to Gnosticism. And obviously, the eyewitnesses, those who knew the eyewitnesses, the Orthodox Christians said that's false. Jesus had a real body. The point of his death is not to escape the body. The point of the resurrection is the body's good. Christ promised eternal life in heaven where there will be a physical body. So the Gnostic Gospels, like Thomas and Peter and Mary Magdalene, were rejected because they were based on Gnostic philosophy. That's easy to understand.
If I could, and I hate to keep bringing it back here, but why is Jesus God? I mean, that's like really the fundamental question. Why is a person in a certain place in time and history God? And in addition to that, after he died and there was a movement forming around him, there were disagreements within the movement about where to take it, who should be involved, who could be a Christian.
Yeah.
If Peter had had his way, it probably would not be a global religion. So, you know, in a very kind of simplistic look at the dichotomy between Paul and Peter, Paul being the evangelist, Peter being the purist. So you can even imagine in a historical sense how, you know, that might not have jived in the same way that it did. And I just don't understand how you can say one person and one time and one place in history is God, and let's be honest, we're saying it because he rose from the dead.
All right, the reason that I believe Jesus is God is, first of all, because he claimed to be.
Sure.
Second point, he backed up that claim with, first of all, a sinless life. In 1 John chapter 3, his closest friend, the Apostle John, could write of Jesus, "In him is no sin." Secondly, he taught amazing ethical teachings. Robert Coles at Harvard points out that all the writings on ethics over the past 2,000 years are simply footnotes to the Sermon on the Mount.
Well, if that's the case, why did Christianity need to draw on thousands of years of Greek tradition if it had everything it already needed within the Torah, within the Septuagint? Like, what was the need to draw on thousands of years of tradition from other parts of the world?
Sir, the Sermon on the Mount is 3 chapters. It does not cover every ethical issue. It does not cover every philosophical issue.
But to call everything else a footnote is maybe a little bit extreme.
The point is, whoever gave the Sermon on the Mount was absolutely off the charts brilliant. That is an ethical treatise that's incredible.
So God needs to be humanly brilliant too?
No, the question is, that you've asked is, why should I trust Jesus when he claims to be God? And I'm answering your question, which is a great question. Because first of all, the evidence of his lifestyle demands respect. Secondly, the evidence of his ethical teachings demands respect. Thirdly, the way he died, loving and forgiving his enemies at the moment of his most excruciating pain, as he's nailed to a wooden crossbeam, demands the utmost respect. Fourthly and finally, the evidence of his resurrection from the dead demands respect. That is why faith in Christ is so wise.
Why do I have to respect Jesus because he rose from the dead? Why do I have to?
Why are you a student at Texas State University? I hope that you're a student at Texas State University because the evidence is this place hires very fine professors. And if you study under these professors and trust them, they will help you to intellectually grow. That's a good, wise trust, faith that you have in Texas State University. Now, when it comes to the ultimate issues of life, where do I come from? Why am I here? Now that I am here, how should I live my life? Is there a God who gives a rip about me, or is there not? And what about life after death? It would be wise for you to be very careful who you trust to answer those basic, fundamental human questions. And when you read the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, you will find that Jesus answers those questions like nobody else. There's a quality, a depth, an insightfulness that is off the charts.
I mean, there's no doubt we should respect Jesus for the life he led, but to think he's God based on 2,000-year-old testimony is fallible because, I mean, science today, you know, eyewitness accounts of events are always completely off. People have different ways they saw it. I mean, this is based on, you're saying it's fact from 2,000-year-old testimony. And you can't trust just because a group of people said this is how it was, it doesn't mean it's fact.
Okay, good. Now, if you really believe what you just said, I don't have the faintest idea why you're not getting on an airplane tonight and getting out of this culture, this society. Because in this society, sir, you can go to your death, based on eyewitness testimony that you murdered somebody. So if you really believe what you just said, that eyewitness testimony is not that credible, you better get out of here. Because our legal system is based on the reliability of eyewitness testimony. And if there are enough eyewitnesses who say, we saw him murder him, you're going to your death, sir.
In the last few decades, there have been many people sent to their deaths because of eyewitness testimony.
That's right.
The human mind should not be trusted on an individual basis. That's what I'm saying.
Yes, sir, if you really believe what you say, that the human mind should not be trusted.
On an individual basis, but if you take it within the lens of science, if you take human ideas and put them through that scientific method, through an observable method, there will be a different outcome.
Yeah. Fine. Then don't trust your mind.
I don't trust my mind. I trust.
Oh, come on.
I trust.
Aren't you a student here?
I trust the collective rationality through an observable scientific process as the means to gain knowledge. I
Really?
do not trust myself independently.
Really?
No, I don't.
And so your family relationships and your dating life is based on scientifically motivated methods.
Are uncertain because I'm human.
No, sir. It's not the way you live your life.
It's the way I live my life.
No,
I
you
don't
don't.
live my life in certainty.
What's it like to go on a scientific date? What's it like to go on a scientific date? You don't base your life on science, sir. The majority of the quality of your life is based on relationships with people. You don't cram a person into a test tube. Instead, you learn to trust a person and develop a friendship. And hopefully there's some love and compassion. Hopefully there's some evidence that the person's not going to lie and rip you off. Sir, you don't base your life on science. Now, science is a wonderful branch of knowledge, and we all trust science and use science, and that's good. Come on, sir, don't tell me that unless you can scientifically verify something, you're not going to trust it. If you look at your life, you're not a scientific brain. You're a human being. And the key to your life is relationships. The key to your life is not an experiment in a lab. It's relationships. All right, Jesus says, God created you for a purpose. And that purpose is to love God with your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and to love your neighbor as yourself.
Amen.
Now just look at your life. Jesus makes a ton of sense.
Why do I need Jesus to love people?
Good. You don't. You can love people as an atheist, no question about it.
Well, I'm not saying I'm an atheist.
All right, whatever. You
I'm
bet,
just
agnostic,
saying
whatever you are.
what-
You bet. I don't know what you are. Well, what are you?
Oh, I'm nothing.
No, you're something.
No, I'm nothing.
You're someone.
No, I'm really nothing.
No, I don't agree with you.
Well, that's what I am.
No. You're a human being with incredible value and dignity.
No, I know that, but I'm saying, what am I? If I were to label myself, I just wouldn't.
Okay, good.
I just wouldn't bother.
Okay, good. But here's where I'm suspicious. You have to answer the question, what is the basis of my worth? And if you refuse to answer that, you're going to have to answer the question, what's the basis of her worth? Because you're either going to walk over her.
What do you mean by the basis of worth?
Why is she valuable? Why is she worth anything?
What do you mean by valuable?
What if the answer to that question?
Significant.
How would you value someone?
And
You value someone by saying, you know something? There is a difference between this and this. If I step on this, that is not morally wrong. If I step on you, that is morally wrong. Why? No. Because you are not. It's okay. You're not inanimate matter. You're a human being created by God for a purpose. I'm a human being created by God for a purpose, which means our lives are not meaningless.
Yeah.
See, if there is no God, there is no difference between this and this.
Yeah.
Why? Because if there is no God, what's reality? All of reality is matter and energy. So this is one form of matter and energy, and this is another form of matter and energy. No qualitative difference, simply different forms of matter and energy. See, that is why Camus, Albert Camus, the French atheistic existentialist philosopher, and Friedrich Nietzsche, the German atheistic philosopher, were so spot on, because they had the courage to face the logical consequences of their atheism. See, if you say there is no God, then what is real? Matter and energy. This is one form of matter and energy. This is another form of matter and energy. This is another form of matter and energy.
And really, it's
No qualitative difference. So you see, which means you don't have any value.
Okay.
But according to Jesus Christ, pardon?
That's arguable, yes.
But according to Jesus Christ, because there is a God who created you in his image, because there is a God who loves you deeply, so much so that he sent his son Christ to die on a cross for you, therefore, if I abuse you, degrade you in any way, that is absolutely evil.
But Jesus isn't what gives her life value. Like, let's say...
Yeah, if Jesus is God, Jesus is the one who gives her life value. If he's not God, then forget about him.
What I'm saying
But
is
God is the one who gives you value.
You just said earlier
How
that
does
it's
that even give you
relationships
value?
that give your life value.
No, it's not relationships that give my life value. No. Relationships are a lot of what life is all about. It's God who gives my life value, and God created me to live in relationships, to love him and to love others.
We're talking about facts and history. And 2,000 years ago, it was strictly testimony. I mean, if ISIS were to take over the Middle East and say, you know, this is what everyone thought, and then in 2,000 years, we read, hey, this is what everyone thought, and it's not actually what everyone thought, and we believe it, we're not using logic. I mean, you're basically saying that Jesus is God because a book says he's God. The argument for miracles is defeasible because testimony, it's more likely that the testimony is false than an actual miracle occurred. So my problem is, Jesus, if he existed, was the greatest man who ever lived, but to call him God, you can't back that up by saying, look at this 2,000-year-old book, and look at what these people said.
Okay, but if this man who is so great, who lives such a life of compassion and forgiveness, claims to be God in human form, what do you do with that?
I take it with a grain of salt.
Okay, but what do you, then after you've taken it with a grain of salt, what does that mean practically
Look,
you
if
do?
I met Jesus and I saw him rise from the dead, then we would be talking about the possibility that he was God. But if I followed someone who was morally perfect and they told me I'm God and I'm going to rise from the dead, I'd say, that's fine, I'll believe you when I see it. Otherwise, you're the greatest man I've ever met and you've got something wrong also. There's something not up here right. Until I see it, how can I believe it? He might have fulfilled every moral promise.
So do you really believe that? Unless I can see it, I cannot believe it. Is that what you really believe?
Well, you got me there. No.
Good. Okay, so shouldn't you be open to the possibility that human beings can at times speak the truth? So can't you be open to the possibility that Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and Paul and Peter, when they talked about having seen Jesus Christ risen from the dead, that possibly they were speaking the truth?
Yes, but to say it's possible is not to say it's true.
Okay, good. So then, if it's possible that Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, Peter, James, Paul were speaking the truth when they insisted that Christ rose from the dead, don't you think it would be wise to go back and study their documents very carefully to ascertain whether they were lying or whether they were speaking the truth? Wouldn't that be worthy study for you?
Yeah, but the problem lies in the credibility of those documents. There's
Good.
a lot of questions.
Okay, good. So start. What's your first question about the credibility of the document?
Who wrote it? What was their motive? Who'd they know? What were they trying to achieve?
Good question. Great question.
Probably more pertinent.
The guys who wrote it had no upside perk. The guys who wrote it were persecuted. They were martyred for their belief in Jesus. They died for it. Matthew, John were martyred. Peter was crucified upside down. Paul was beheaded. Not good perks. And yet they insisted that they had seen Jesus risen from the dead, that he was Lord. So I think the motive is pretty clear. They were convinced that he was the truth. And they died not for political power. They died not for financial gain. They died for the one they were convinced was reliable and true.
And that's true, but so did Nazis for Hitler. No, they died.
Yeah.
They at the end suffered for what they believed in, and they stuck to it for this. The same principle applies logically. It's we're going to suffer for something we're fanatical about, but that fanaticism might not be the right fanaticism. It might not be true.
Okay.
They just were willing to die for what they stood for.
Okay, now here's the difference. The difference is the Nazis died for a philosophy. Matthew, John, Peter, Thomas died for what they claimed to have seen.
But what makes
The
Jesus
dead Christ risen from the dead, which means they either died for what they knew to be a lie, And if you study psychology, you will find out people do not die for what they know to be a lie. People will die for a lie, convinced it's the truth. But if these guys make up and fabricate this resurrection of Christ, they know very well Christ didn't rise from the dead. They fabricated this. They would not, sir, be willing to die for their lie. People don't do that. Just look at Watergate. Dean, Ehrlichman, and Haldeman, 3 brilliant American lawyers, lied about the Watergate scandal. Finally, when the pressure was on, and the evidence was the Watergate scandal really did occur, they all cracked. They were not willing to go through a few years of prison to cover up what they knew to be a lie. How much more unlikely for a group of first-century guys to create and fabricate this lie that Jesus had risen from the dead and they'd seen him, and then be willing to die for it.
Well, to presuppose they manufactured it's not what I'm saying. They might have really thought they saw it. I mean, it's just a matter of, like, someone who takes acid thinks they saw a lot of things they didn't see. I'm not saying they would have manufactured it to where motive's the question.
Right.
It's a question of, did they see what actually happened, or were they deluded?
I understand. Okay, and this is why you got to go to the source document. The reason you got to go to the source document is because of what you just said. Maybe they just hallucinated. Maybe they fabricated. So what you got to do is you got to go to the source document. Now notice the unembellished language of the resurrection account. Matthew chapter 28. It's 10 verses. After the Sabbath at dawn on the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary went to look at the tomb. There was a violent earthquake, for an angel of the Lord came down from heaven and going to the tomb, rolled back the stone and sat on it. His appearance was like lightning, and his clothes were white as snow. The guards were so afraid of him that they shook and became like dead men. The angel said to the women, "Do not be afraid, for I know that you are looking for Jesus who was crucified. He is not here, he has risen, just as he said. Come and see the place where he lay, then go quickly and tell his disciples, he has risen from the dead and is going ahead of you into Galilee. There you will see him, now I have told you." So the women hurried away from the tomb, afraid, yet filled with joy, and ran to tell his disciples. Suddenly Jesus met them. "Greetings," he said. They came to him, clasped his feet, and worshipped him. Then Jesus said to them, "Do not be afraid. Go and tell my brothers to go to Galilee. There they will see him." That's it.
How does that not sound embellished?
It's not embellished. It's a whole resurrection account in 10 verses. Now read the Gospel of Peter. The Gospel of Peter, which is pseudepigraphal and Gnostic in form, has this incredible talking cross coming out behind Jesus. This is very short, unembellished, giving no explanation. Oh, by the way, if you believe in Jesus, then you go to heaven. None of that. You just hear the facts. This is what happened.
Let's say the resurrection is true. What happens to people who miss the cutoff point? They were born just a couple thousand years too early, and
Yeah. Well, fortunately, Hebrews chapter 11 talks about a lot of those people who never heard about Jesus, who will be in heaven because they put their faith in God.
what about Australopithecus? What about
I don't know.
Afarensis? Do they miss the cutoff point?
No. The good news is that God is all-knowing, God is just and compassionate, so God's going to judge all of us uniquely and fairly. Now listen to this resurrection account also in Luke. While they were still, this is the disciples, talking about this, which the women had reported that Jesus had risen, Jesus himself stood among them and said to them, "Peace be with you." They were startled and frightened, thinking they saw a ghost. They didn't conclude, "Oh, welcome back from the dead, Jesus." No, they thought they were hallucinating, just like you said. They thought this was a ghost of some type of apparition. He said to them, "Why are you troubled? And why do doubts rise in your minds? Look at my hands and my feet. It is I myself. Touch me and see. A ghost does not have flesh and bones as you see I have." See, your question is very reasonable. It's exactly what the disciples questioned when they saw Jesus risen. Oh no, what was in our drink? Oh no, what's happening to us psychologically? And he deals with it and says, "Come on guys, give me something to eat and drink. Come on guys, grab hold of me and see. A spirit does not have flesh and bone the way you see I have." See, so your doubts, your questions are totally understandable, totally reasonable. It's exactly what the first century disciples struggled with. It makes sense.
Good. Thank you.
You bet, man. Good to meet you. Thanks so much.
Islam, there's Muslims, there's Jews, there's Christians, and I'm an atheist. But I still totally understand what he's saying because everybody lives their life by something. I do believe that there is more than just what is in front of us, there's that matter, but I don't believe in God. If I did, my God would be treat people the way you want to be treated, to make people happy, because that's what will benefit the world.
The question becomes, what is the conscience? Because if you're an atheist, what you're saying is all of reality is limited to matter and energy. There's no soul, there's no free will, there's no person. There are complex biochemical reactions.
If I may,
So, good and evil are simply arbitrary things that different chemical reactions have invented, which means they're not absolute, they're just relative, they're opinions.
Sir,
And what is love for an atheist? If the atheist is going to be consistent, love is simply a biochemical reaction.
Well,
Right?
why does it have to be simply? Why can't it be complexly a biochemical reaction
Fine,
that is
complexly.
actually a
it's not
wonderful
simple.
thing?
Fine.
It's quite
Okay,
complex.
complex biochemical reaction. But what you cannot escape is, if you're an atheist, you have limited reality. You've limited reality to matter and energy, however complex you want to put it. It's still matter and energy. You have no soul, you have no I that can judge me. No, there's just my complex, highly complex biochemical reaction, that's all. There's a history professor emeritus at the University of Florida named Dr. Somerville. And in every one of Dr. Somerville's classes, he used to stand up at the first class at the beginning of the semester and say, think with me a second. The old lady is walking down the street with a big purse. You have a pretty good understanding that in that purse is a lot of money, cash. Are you going to beat her up and steal her purse? If not, why? And then he presented two scenarios. He said, some of you are not going to beat her up and steal her purse because you do not want to degrade yourself that way. You don't want to dishonor yourself that way. You don't want to dishonor your family or your fraternity or sorority or your group. Others of you, on the other hand, are not going to beat her up and steal her purse because you're thinking about what would that leave her with financially? How would she care for her loved ones? Now, which of you students embrace the first motive, honor, self-honor? Which of you embrace the second one, compassion for an elderly woman and her dependents? Every single year, every student raised their hand and said, the second one. We would not beat up the woman and steal the purse because of compassion. Because we're thinking, what about children, grandchildren who depend upon her? What about her life? Then, after they would vote and all the students would take the second option, he would say to those students, you who call yourself atheist and agnostic are more Christian than you would like to realize. Because the majority of ethics that non-Christians hold to in the world, when it comes to Hinduism, Islam, Buddhism, Shintoism, that ethic is based on honor. Honor of the family, honor of the tribe. But Jesus Christ taught compassion, which means genuine love for other people. So you're more Christian than you would like to admit. That is why I would encourage you to read the Gospels to check out Jesus Christ. But I hope you realize the center of Christianity is not Europe. It's not America. The center of following Christ is Africa, South America, and China.
I don't believe in God. I am completely content with my life. I do have a purpose. My purpose is to do what I can to benefit people. My purpose is to try and learn so I can understand others. And I can do my best to make other people happy.
Good.
I don't feel like I need a God. I believe that my God is treating people the way they want to be treated and doing the best to benefit the world. I mean, Aristotle said that the greatest purpose in life is eudaimonia, which is just content, happiness, and it's not without struggle. Christians struggle too. It's humans struggle, and I don't believe that you won't just don't have a purpose. Everybody has a purpose. People's lives are to search for meaning. And I believe that the analogy that you said, as a fish jumping out of the ocean,
Right.
or a train on the tracks, can be flip and rolls. Let's say the tracks was science. Let's say the ocean was Hinduism. I don't understand how that analogy is set in stone, because it's too ambiguous to me. I feel like the roles are just not certain.
Now, I have great respect for you that you want to help people. All I'm doing is using an intellectual, logical argument with you. That's all I'm doing. I respect you for living a life to help people. That is marvelous. I obviously agree with you in so far as you say that. All my point is to you is, why should you believe in God? Because, as you said yourself, as I was trying to tell these two guys, you can't live without meaning. Instead, you construct meaning. But if you're going to be consistent with what you say you believe, that there is no God, what you have to acknowledge is that that meaning that you're living for, you have created.
Right.
Which means if you create the opposite, that's just as legitimate.
It's true.
Thank you. That's all I've been trying. Thank you for listening. Well enough. That's all I'm saying. Now, just think about that. Whatever you have created as the meaning of your life, and I'm sure you guys do a good job, just acknowledge that if you chose the opposite, that is just as legitimate, just as good. See, that's the despair of atheism. And that's what I'm not sure that many of you guys are willing to face.